and we can't talk about it because all steps made after summer of 2007, the Kremlin made, were leading to the military invasion, starting from withdrawal from the CFE agreement, going to increasing its military presence in Abkhazia and South Ossetia, as well as military provocations that eventually led to 2008 open military invasion of Georgia, with clear objective to undermine Georgian state and to establish puppet government. About that, it was clearly stated by Foreign Minister Lavrov in his conversation with the State Secretary Condoleezza Rice when they had the phone conversation about the ceasefire. And Lavrov mentioned as a hosting of Georgian government, elected government of Tbilisi government, as objective of Russian military invasion. I'd like to stop here and pass to Batu to continue, and then I'd be glad to answer all questions you might have.
I must say that I remember this time perfectly well. I used to serve as chief of the late President Lech Kaczynski's chancellery, then in this office, visiting Washington frequently, talking to President, also contacting my Georgian counterparts. We were pretty aware about mounting pressure. Ambassador Kutelia, could you please tell us about developments in days immediately preceding the war and the developments during war and leading to ceasefire talks?
Yes, thank you very much, Anna. Thank you for your leadership and picking this important issue, especially these days when we see full-fledged war that Russia waged against Ukraine, but not only against Ukraine, but against the free world, the idea of the freedom and democracy. That's why we today say that Ukraine is more than Ukraine, and that the days of Russian invasion in Georgia, we were saying that the Georgia was more than Georgia. And a very important component of our research and the paper was to analyze the bigger context of the events. What triggered Russian aggression, how Russia interpreted Western behavior, and also how Russia perceived its goals, exploring the weaknesses of the international security system and organizations, where they had either veto power or direct or indirect influence. So in this report you could see that Western security system or the global security order that is based on this system was not ready at that time to prevent Russian aggression. Aggression that Russia declared openly, Putin himself declared openly in 2007 on Munich Security Conference, and then slowly starting exercises, implementing his plan, as Dato said. Another component is that once the war happened, also it was quite obvious that not only Western security arrangements were not ready to prevent this, but also to react properly or make Russia roll back their misdeeds and mischiefs. There were no leverages to influence Russia to push back or to do some kind of arrangement, slowly reverting all these doings. And the third component, also what we've seen, we can see in this report, is that what is happening today in Ukraine. So the current world order, supported by the international organizations that we have right now at hand, are not ready to prevent in the future this happening again. There are immediate reactions that made possible Georgian state to survive at that time. First of all, it was immediate military reaction from the United States and President Bush. shipping humanitarian aid with military ships and military aviation. That was a strong signal that the humanitarian aid to Georgia will be militarily supported by the United States. And that was, I think, the red line that Russia did not dare to step, and that stopped open hostilities. Another component, and also while we are discussing this, we can draw the parallels, what is happening now. Another component was the ceasefire agreement, and once the immediate hostilities are stopped, of course, you need a ceasefire agreement, and EU-French presidency and President Sarkozy's leadership at that time to take this responsibility was very important, and we got a 6-point, so-called the 6-point agreement. Well, nobody had at that time or have illusion that Russia is implementing what they are signing, and they have a very 100% negative track record in terms of implementing the documents they signed. But this document was rather simple. It had 6 basic principles. First was the not to resort to force. Second was to end hostilities definitively, to provide free access to the humanitarian aid, Georgian military forces withdrawing to the previous positions, Russian military forces withdrawing from Georgian territory to their previous location, and also opening up international talks on security and stability arrangements in occupied, currently Russian-occupied territories. Only Georgian part of this commitment of the ceasefire agreement has been fulfilled. Georgia withdrew its forces to the previous statement. None of the bullets or points in this agreement that was the Russian responsibility have implemented. Even there was no single half step from Russia to implement this. So we are reviewing in this report each of these 6 points and its current state and why it has not been implemented. Just the opposite. We've seen during this period of time a creeping annexation, slowly increasing the territories the Russian occupying, military build-up on all those occupied territories, and those military units, now we see that they left for Ukraine to fight and support Russian war in Ukraine. So again, it is a proof that this is what is happening in Ukraine, continuation of what Russia started in Georgia. And plus also with this military build-up, we also saw legal institutional integration of occupied territories into the Russian legal and security system. And we are bringing those facts here, which gives that a bigger picture, broader picture, but also important is few interesting stories that we are referring in our report. One of those stories is that a quote-unquote defense minister of South Ossetia at that time, now once in 2014 Russia started war against Ukraine and annexation of Crimea, this person has been seconded now to fight against Ukraine. Yeah. So this is a part of the system. This is a one particular story, but it really gives the strength of how Russia operates. And then more importantly, of course, as every report should be doing, this report brings up the recommendations. So we divided our recommendations in 6 major parts. First recommendation to Western community, to European Union, and especially because, again, after 14 years we have a French presidency, I think it's kind of a symbolism and also the opportunity for EU to finish the unfinished job that has started there. So the first recommendation is to make this unfulfilled 6-point agreement part of the bigger European security agenda context. It is one building block of unfulfilled commitments, but it's part of the wider discussions, and especially after what we see is Russia is doing in Ukraine, that discussion will be happening sooner or later, but sooner better. And this holistic policy should encompass, and we advocate it here, of economic, defense, security, and democracy pillars. On the other hand, also this recommendation includes a more offensive stance from the Western community, and in offensive stance we mean, and here we advocate now well implemented sanctions policy. And we also advocate here, and it was even before the war, that economic, political, and individual sanctions should be part of the democracy being offensive against Russia. The second recommendation is about the re-energizing the process of unfinished job. So again, Georgia is more than Georgia, Ukraine is more than Ukraine, and the unfinished job is this idea and concept which we all like, and now we see it in a Western vocabulary quite often used again, and I'm really happy to see it: Europe whole and free and in peace. This business was not finished in 2008. It was stopped at Bucharest NATO summit at the doorsteps of the Georgia and Ukraine, and this process needs to be prolonged. And that leads us to our third recommendation, particularly to the NATO membership. And in Bucharest, Georgia and Ukraine got this promise, and we think that not only every inch of the NATO territory should be defended, but every inch of NATO promise should be defended. And Georgia and Ukraine NATO membership is a NATO promise, and should be NATO's political agenda as soon as possible. The fourth recommendation is directed towards the European Union and the Western community. We've seen Russia trying through different hybrid means to see the differences or the cracks within the unity, but also we've seen that this unity is so powerful that really supported Ukraine's fight against the Russian aggression. And this unity should be reinforced by the policy of no to divide option. And this no to divide should be kind of an umbrella policy that every bilateral relations with Russia, whether it's an energy, whether it's a trade, even humanitarian issues, should be coordinated and synchronized among the Western allies, not to let Russia to exercise some kind of differences. And our fifth recommendation is concerning about the Eastern Partnership project and program, which when it was introduced, had a big strategic impact. I think it brought a very good shedded light the way how Georgia, Ukraine, and other Eastern Partner countries would integrate in Europe. And I think Eastern Partnership should expand its scope to the defense and security and peacemaking. Now, especially after the Ukraine thing, it is more than relevant what we advocate in our recommendation. And plus, last but not least, our sixth recommendation is EU's economic impact and the soft power. So again, when we speak about the consequences of Russian aggression, one of the biggest leverage that European Union has against the aggression is the soft power of economic integration of the countries affected by Russian aggression and countries that are on the front line of democracy, having a strong economic influx in the infrastructure, in economy, in a trade that will secure their place in the future European architecture. That is also the will and the expressed desire of the Western community and the result of this unity that we hear nowadays a lot. So I will stop here. This was the trajectory of our report and the conclusions, and would be happy to discuss particular components of it.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank both of you for a brief presentation of the report. I think that it is interesting to elaborate on several issues, and that I would like to ask you about narratives. So information war then accompanied also the war, military kinetic actions taken by Russian Federation. Information or narratives preceding war and in the course of war and then after a ceasefire. I think that there are some lessons learned already when we look into current phase of full-fledged war in Ukraine. But please elaborate on your experience in this.
Exactly, Anna. Information has become a weapon of war in hands of Kremlin, And then with the development of the technologies and then social networks, it has become even much more powerful weapon. Actually, this is as Batu said, we see it as a big war that started in 2008 and expanded to Ukraine in 2014, and then now we have another full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But it does not mean that this war does not expand, especially the informational part or economic part or the part that also deals with the corrupt practices to other countries. We see informational offensive on United States, on our European colleagues. When we are talking about the narratives that we saw during 2008 and the Kremlin narratives, we see a lot of similarities with what we hear now, some conspiracy theories and development of the conspiracy theories, disinformation and propaganda. These both are skillfully used by Kremlin propaganda. But also what they are doing, they are using free speech that free world embraces, and they're trying to turn it against free world. So we also see the narrative lines, or particular narrative lines, that it's all blaming particular governments elected by people, disseminating disinformation. For example, we've seen disseminated information that Zelensky is about to surrender. We see disseminating disinformation that Zelensky is, and then some people are trying to escape Ukraine. We saw it exactly the same narratives in Georgia, that Georgian government, that some government officials were leaving. No one has left. No high-level government officials has left. They all were staying in Tbilisi. We saw huge disinformational narrative. Who started the war? Why? How this war has? Yeah,
absolutely.
And unfortunately, there are some people that still using this, that blaming Saakashvili to start, that he started the war. We saw the same narrative line. And I have to praise here the bravery of U.S. administration, who released its intel information they had beforehand that Russia was going on to attack Ukraine. And then just because they released this and then released this intelligence that Russia was preparing to attack Ukraine, this line that that Russia was planning to blame Ukraine for this war was weaker, and then no one has believed. That was not the case in Georgia, and then we saw Putin saying about 14,000 victims in Donetsk and Lugansk. It's very similar to what Putin was saying about the 2,000 people died in Tskhinvali region, which never happened. And so, lot of similarities.
Yes, sir. Yes, certainly. I think that after war of August 2008, in international perception, this border between victim and aggressor was somehow blurred much more. Of course, U.S. was absolutely clear and working to disseminate news about war and clear assessment. But what was important also was knowledge, engagement and participation of leaders of my region, our region, yes. Central and Eastern Europe. It was this trip endeavored by 5 leaders of Poland under leadership of President Lech Kaczyński, but also President of Lithuania, of Ukraine at that time President of Estonia and Prime Minister of Latvia. I think that lessons learned are there. In Ukraine, it is very clear about the actions taken. Probably it is due to technology, but also to international institutions. They are much more outspoken and clear in assessment. How would you assess this, and in particular the knowledge that is there in Central and Eastern Europe to help the world in understanding nature of the regime ruling Kremlin and ruling in Russian Federation?
Yes, you are absolutely right. In the times of crisis, well, of course, it's important to have institutions. It's important to have particular means of reacting immediately, but also, as we've seen in numerous times and now as well, the personal leadership matters a lot. Personal leadership of President Kaczynski and presidents of Estonia, Lithuania, the idea of being united, showing unity, and notwithstanding that the Russian planes were in the air coming to Tbilisi, of 5 Eastern European presidents, was a very important step that set it the bar. That it's, first of all, that Georgia is not alone, and that was a very big moral encouragement. But also that was a beginning of a new process. And I personally view this as a process, because the world is evolving. The world was different in 2008, and after the hot phase of this war in Georgia was over, world started evolving. Institutions started to change. It was a quite painful process, realizing that there were mistakes made earlier to prevent and ways to find the solutions. Unfortunately, it took quite a long period of time to learn some of lessons. For example, even notwithstanding of the 2008 invasion and 2014 Crimean annexation, until 2016, the day when there was a NATO summit in Warsaw, the NATO and the allies were mentioning Russia as a partner. So it took 8 years to shift this paradigm that Russia is not partner anymore, but the enemy number one. So there is a lag. Well, democratic countries have, of course, some lag because, and authoritarians perceive it as their advantage. They can act quickly, and democracies need to adapt and react, and they have some time to consolidate public opinion. But still, there are some lessons even during these 8 years. First of all, there should be no reset with the aggressor. And I think the reset policy launching immediately after war, and now everyone says that admits that that was a strategic mistake. Also, no commercial deals or no dual standards dealing with Russia economically. For example, no French missile Mistral ships to Russia, while they are aggressors and violated the sovereignty and territorial integrity of second country. So these are the lessons that we've learned, and now, still unfortunately it took a long time, but now we see that institutions are realizing that still, besides, the soft power, the hard power or military component is needed to stop the aggression. We see this changing as well, starting with the NATO raising the military spending, more capabilities, not only to the NATO countries, but also to the partner countries who are contributing to the overall security in Europe and the Euro-Atlantic area. So these are the particular components, but also, again, going back where I started, the personal leadership, because the personal leadership matters a lot. The messages that US President will deliver in Brussels and in Poland will resonate across the countries, especially in Poland, because Poland is doing a great job, first of all, supporting Ukraine, and we all appreciate it enormously, but also because things are seeing differently from Poland, what is happening in Ukraine. It's on the border of aggression, and Russia now tries to target the Poland as a NATO ally. Because now, as we see, and I'll stop there, the institutionally, the only effective institution that can stop further aggression is the NATO, with the capabilities and the ability, political as well as military abilities.
Thank you. Well, several months after war in Georgia, President Lech Kaczynski, one of a person perceived by Russian Federation as an enemy #1, perished in Smolensk catastrophe. Former third president of Georgia at that time, defending Georgia during this crisis, during aggression of Russia, is in prison as hostage to Russian wishes. On this, it was, I think, that special environment to this was created also by a report, so-called independent report by Heidi Tagliavini. Can you, as I told, blurring this border between aggressor and the victim, trying to rationalize war. How should we act vis-a-vis aggressor? What is necessary? Because when I read the report, and I repeat, it was finished in December 2021, so yeah, before the full-scale aggression on Ukraine. Many points are still valid. And how should we avoid this unclear assessment of situation?
Yeah, you are absolutely right. Actually, any kind of any blurring of these boundaries, and then any illusion that could bring more stability and require people to do less with regard of this aggression, can actually initiate or support another aggression by Russia. And I think you are absolutely right that there is absolutely necessary to have the moral clarity. Who is aggressor, and then without the clear understanding that where responsibilities are lying, and then what can be done and should be done with regard of it, I think we are only inviting another aggression, another aggressive actions by Russia on the European continent. It's not only Georgia, Ukraine, or maybe only its neighborhood even. So by seeking of, let's call it the zone of comfort, where there will be the less need to act for free nations, and that's only invites aggression from aggressor, and then we are witnessing and we are paying for it nowadays, and then every day. So I think that yeah, of course, the clear assessment, clarity about what is going on, and then unnecessary political correctness is only making picture blurry.
Yeah. It is almost 1 month after start of the full-fledged invasion of Russian Federation on Ukraine. We see brave, resolute, heroic actions by Ukrainian soldiers. you served as Deputy Minister of Defense during the August war on Georgia. How would you compare the state of Russian forces and determination actually to fight? Are they aware fighting unjust wars? Because both wars on Georgia and Ukraine were unjust, cruel. Now we see clear war crimes perpetrated. It happened earlier already in Crimea and eastern Ukraine. How do you assess, from military point of view, both stages of Russian aggressive posture?
Yes, that's a very interesting and important question. The myth of Russian military all-mightiness is really fading away. Though the Georgian war against Russia was short and lasted only 5 days, the world was different at that time. Georgia did not have any Western military equipment. But still, one of the conclusions at that time what we drew is that corrupt army is no threat to the well-motivated army with a small size, who has a just purpose to defend its own territorial integrity and its own free will. That there was a process of Russia also trying to modernize their armed forces after they learned lessons in Georgia, because in Georgia they lost few very important pieces of equipment, including the strategic bomber that was shot down by the help of our Ukrainian friends, who earlier provided some components of Georgian air defense system. And our Georgian air defense system at that time was not the best, but at least as long as they lasted, they managed to fight against Russian air dominance as well. This is a lesson learned now in Ukraine. But also what we see is that it's not only the army is corrupt. The corrupt army is part of the corrupt state. Corrupt, kleptocratic state cannot win the just war. Maybe at some point in Georgia they achieved the territorial gains of occupying parts of our territory, but we maintained our state. The same is with Ukraine. I believe that now with the Russian army losing totally motivation, Ukraine being on an uplifting mood and destroying this entire big Russian machinery. And another lesson learned is that the modern equipment, the Western-made equipment, has no match when Russians are posing this type of resistance. Russian military equipment and their modernization was just maybe very superficial, but entire armed forces still remain the Soviet type of machinery, relying on quantity rather than the quality. And with the Western anti-tank and anti-air systems, plus, of course, the motivation of Ukraine armed forces, technological advantage really proved to be successful, including the drones, including the other means of effective communication. We see that Russians are losing their top generals on the field, which is an indicator of internal weakness of the command and control system. Huge problems with communication. Again, this is the characterization of the low-tech army, but also important component in the military domain, of course, is the military and civilian leadership and cooperation. And when we see how Russia is trying to get military gains, only thing they do to do the atrocities, to do the war crimes, and to do this fear-mongering on the civilians. On the other side, from Ukrainians, then the same was in Georgia, and I agree with that. So that was Russian propaganda who was trying to influence the public opinion that the leaders are running, or Saakashvili was afraid, or the government members ran away. That never happened. This is not happening in Ukraine. That's what Russia wanted to achieve, and they could not achieve. So there is no only one leader, President Zelensky, right now, but he is the leader. But there are other leaders, city mayors, civilians who are in charge of taking care of civilian population. So These components, military, civilian, moral, technology, and of course the Western support, and when you have a strong tail support, this is the decisive in that type of wars.
Current invasion of Ukraine is a dramatic sign of Russia's will to reinstate the spheres of influence and its grip on, in particular, on Central and Eastern Europe, former Soviet bloc territories, but also of even ambitious are much higher to eastern flank of NATO. What is your message to international community and to Eastern partners? How to successfully disable those ambitions and how to deter Russia?
Yeah. Well, actually, intentions intention to create zones of influence, it has no boundaries. It's a kind of doing it slice by slice. We saw Europeans. We learned it from history. What does it look like? We saw it in the 30s. We saw it in the history books in the 30s when Hitler was expanding its zones of influence, and then after all that, with no boundaries, and then just trying to put under his influence entire Europe. We saw it with Stalin until it was the red line was drawn in Europe, and then now. This problem and then this threat is to every freedom-loving man. Now Ukrainians are fighting for not only their freedom, but for the freedom of all freedom-loving people in Europe and in the world. So they deserve all support. President Zelensky and his team deserves all support the world can render and then provide. And of course, there are no limits what can be done. And then what stops this kind of dictators is resolve and unity. Resolve and unity should be demonstrated every day, and then there should be resolve and unity demonstrated on every direction. Would it be military support? Would it be financial support? Sanctions? And these kind of dictators go as far as free people allow them to go. So that should be the full clear red lines should be drawn, and then West should demonstrate unity and support. Very briefly, why it was important to stop this war in 2008, that 6 leaders of 6 different European countries have arrived to Tbilisi. Because Kaczynski knew power of solidarity, and the solidarity is the strongest weapon the West has, the free world has. And why it was important when President Bush spoke in the Rose Garden with the resolve, because the people like Putin understand only resolve. So I think that unity and resolve is the answer to this issue, to this thing.
Thank you, Batu. I think that our time is limited. We have to start proceedings soon, but probably very last question. I remember visiting Georgia frequently. That Georgians are extremely motivated people. Their resolve to join Western, institutionally join Western community, because they are Westerners like all of us, actually, and their culture is so ancient. You know very well that you deserve both EU and NATO accession. And this idea is so popular among Georgian society. What is your advice for international community and for Georgia, how to proceed in order to achieve this goal?
Thank you, Anna. First of all, what you are doing in terms of accelerating process of Georgia's EU and NATO integration. And we have many friends here in European capital who support this idea.
Sure.
Georgian people feel it. Georgian people overwhelmingly support this idea of joining NATO and the EU. Georgia's NATO membership, Georgia's EU membership, as well as the Ukraine's NATO membership and EU membership and other countries in the region, Eastern Partnership countries integration, I think is a very important preventive step of not letting further this type of aggressions occur. It is the best preventive, and the West should be in a preventive mode. We should be not reacting what the authoritarians like Putin will dictate, but we have to prevent them even thinking. So the resolve is important, solidarity is important, but also institutional guarantees are very important. And I personally think that one of the lessons we already learned is that there are several no's that we should not be doing when we deal with the predator actors like Vladimir Putin. But one thing also not to do is not to have a fraudulent or halfway prepared agreements with because we witnessed that this type of agreements, as it was 6-point agreement with no mechanism of guarantee. The Minsk agreement, again, which gave a lot of interpretation,
Sure.
will generate more problems in the future. And we might have just peace after it, but it will not be just peace.
Ukraine, and permanent.
Ukrainians are fighting just war. And Ukraine and we all deserve now just peace. And this just peace can be achieved only with a strong European and Euro-Atlantic integration for Georgia and Ukraine.
Thank you. And from the European Parliament jointly, there is, we present Polish and Georgian appeal to international community to facilitate candidacy status to Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova as soon as possible. We have the European Council starting, and we count on positive messages. And the same applies to the NATO membership status for Ukraine and Georgia. Both countries, both societies deserve this step. What was promised already a long time ago, 14 years ago in Bucharest. It should be fulfilled. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава.